The Torah portion of Shlach begins with the words Shlach lecha anashim, send out men. This is what God told Moses. And Rashi, the 11th century, father of all biblical commentary, Rabbi Shlomi Yitzchaki, explains the word Shlach lecha, send for yourself men. Why did God say that? Send for yourself. Because actually this wasn't God's idea, it was Moses' idea. God didn't really approve of it. God had promised a miraculous conquest of the land, but the people wanted to be sure that this was viable from a military perspective. So God says to Moses, send for yourself. I don't really approve of it. If you want, you could send for yourself spies. The commentary Kli Yakar, which is authored by Rabbi Ephraim of Lunchitz, a 16th century scholar, lived in Lemberg, later in Prague. He writes a fascinating insight here. He says, extending the same idea of Rashi, he says that God was saying to Moses, Shalach lecha anashim, send for yourself men if you want as spies. But I think you should send female spies. I think you should send women spies. Because the women adored the land. The women said, chapter 27, verse 4, give us a portion in the land. The men despised the land. They said, let's appoint a leader and return to Egypt. Chapter 14, verse 4. So God says a Kli Yakar, God says to Moses, Shalach lecha anashim, send for yourself men if you so desire, but I think you should send women as spies because they are the ones that adore the land. Now, there are many levels of Torah interpretation. We have Peshat, the literal level. We have Remez, allusion. We have Darash, exegesis. We have Soid, Kabbalistic interpretation. But one area that a lot of people are not aware of, which is a fascinating, most beautiful level of interpretation, and that is to analyze the cantillation notes of the Torah itself. As you know, in the synagogue, when the Torah is read, it's not just read out aloud, it's sung. And that's because in the Torah, there are cantillation, in the Chumash, in the oral tradition, we have cantillation notes. They're not written in the Torah scroll, but there's a tradition of how to sing it. And these notes convey tremendous meaning also. Rabbi Menachem Azaria de Fano, who was a 16th century Italian Kabbalist, gave a fascinating insight into the beginning of this week's Torah portion based on the cantillation notes. As you know, there's this idea that when the spies went out, they were already corrupt. There's different views as to how many of them corrupt. Rabbi Menachem Azaria de Fano follows the view that all of them except Joshua were corrupt. Joshua was the only one who, on the departure, was still pure. How do we see that? We see that reflected in the way the notes are sung. All the names of the spies are sung with the note tipcha. The tipcha is a long drawn-out note, and its extended tone reflects an interruption, a musical interruption, which reflects a spiritual interruption between that spy and the root of his soul. In other words, he'd already become disconnected from his source. Listen, take for example the beginning here, the first spy. Ve'ele Shmeisom, these are the names. We sing it like this: Lamate Ruvain Shamua ben Zakur. That note there, Shamua, is a tipcha, and it's drawn out. Shamua, that long note, that interrupted tune, is suggestive, says Rabbi Menachem Azaria de Fano, of a spiritual disconnection. And you read through all the verses, they all have this note, every single spy. Lamate Shemoin Shafat ben Chayri, with one exception. When we get to Joshua, he has a mercha. He has a different note which flows very quickly into the next word, suggesting his state of connectedness to God. Lamate Ephraim Hoshea bin Nun. So we see very beautifully that not only the words and even the vowels of the Torah can be interpreted, but even the ta'amim, even the cantillation notes, are laden with meaning. Chapter 13, verse 26. The Torah says, this is now the spies are returning. They're about to disparage the land. The Torah says, Vayelchu vayavoyu. They went and they came. This is odd. What do you mean they went and they came? They're coming back already. As they're coming back, the Torah says they went. So it should just say they came. So again, we have a fascinating insight from the Arizal, from Rabbi Isaac Luria. And this needs a little bit of background to understand this. You see, I've mentioned the idea of Gilgul, of reincarnation, the idea that we have recycled souls. There's actually another very similar idea, and that's not Gilgul, that you're born with a soul that had a previous life, but another very similar idea called Ibur, which means the impregnation of a soul. This is basically, you could be shopping on a Tuesday afternoon, and all of a sudden, a spark of someone else's soul gets impregnated into you. And why would that happen? Because it could be you're going to be set up for a tremendous challenge, religious challenge, something awesome is going to be happening in your life, and you need extra energy. You need an extra soul power. You need some extra courage. You need something. And sometimes when an extra mission dawns on us in life, God gives us not a whole soul, but a little spark of another soul to empower that mission. And this is what happened to the spies. But Isaac Luria says that when the spies departed on the mission, a spark, they were from the 12 tribes, corresponding to Jacob's 12 sons, a spark of each of Jacob's 12 sons impregnated into the soul of each of the 12 spies to help them on their mission. But when they demurred, when they failed in their mission, that spark became irrelevant, it became unnecessary, it became useless. So it departed. And that's what the Torah is telling us here. They went and they came. As the spies returned, they went. That's not about the spies. They're coming back. They weren't going. It's talking about the sparks of the souls of Jacob's sons, which were impregnated into them. As the spies are returning, about to disparage the land, the sparks which were impregnated into them went. The souls of Jacob's sons went because they didn't want any part of this fiasco. And finally, we have at the end of this Torah portion the mitzvah of tzitzit, of fringes. Our fringes are white, but there's also a part of the mitzvah is to put a thread of techelet, of turquoise wool, a turquoise type of color. We don't know exactly what it is. It doesn't. We don't have that dye anymore, but it doesn't invalidate the tzitzit, so we don't have it. What is the significance? So blue reminds us of the heaven, the fear of the heaven. It's indicative of fear. The white color reminds us of love. It's like when we're babies suckling from our mother, the white milk reminds us of love. The fact that today we don't have blue in our tzitzis teaches us that we're just simply not capable of handling negative emotions. Too much fear we can't handle. Negative emotions are just toxic to the contemporary personality. We really have to focus today on the positive. Spiritual message for the week, spiritual challenge for the week. The spies said that the land of Israel eats up its inhabitants. That's what the ego says. The ego says that the land, if you release yourself from egoic behavior, you won't be able to survive. If you enter purity, the land's purity, if you release from the ego and enter purity, you'll be swallowed up. It's a land that swallows up its inhabitants. The I is going to be dissolved. The ego, the I, is going to be swallowed up. That's a fear we all have. That was the fear of the spies. So your spiritual homework for the week is to do some soul searching. Examine if you have that fear, to adopt religious values, adopt spiritual values, to dissolve the ego to something higher than yourself, and see if the fear of the spies resonates with you, and if the message of Parshat Shlach can teach you that that's just foolish, because separateness is just an illusion, and really it's to the benefit of us all to become part of that big one whole, to enter the land of God. Thank you, and please join us again next week for Torah in 10.